Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the classic story of Cain and Abel. We're going to look closely at the source material to figure out exactly how a simple life of early farming laid the groundwork for the very first crime on Earth. It's an absolutely fascinating look at human nature, the beginnings of civilization, and where conflict really comes from. So how exactly does a quiet life of agriculture spark the world's most infamous sibling rivalry? Let's unpack the psychological buildup here. It's pretty easy to think of early humanity as this blank slate, but as you'll see from the text, the messy, complex emotions we deal with today were literally right there from the start.
All right, Section 1, Life After Eden, the birth of two brothers.
To really understand this crime, we've got to look at the world these brothers were born into. After Adam and Eve were exiled from Eden, life got tough, really tough. They had to survive by tilling the hard soil, growing whatever they could, and keeping cattle. It was right in the middle of this grueling manual labor that Eve had their first child, Cain. A few years later, along came his little brother, Abel. And as they grew up, both boys were put right to work helping their parents in this demanding agricultural life. Moving on to Section 2, A Tale of Two Offerings. The Seeds of Jealousy. Now, what's super interesting here is how their daily chores basically shaped their entire personalities. While they both chipped in, they specialized. Abel, he became the shepherd. The text actually describes him as a genuinely pleasant guy, generous, respectful, and affectionate even to his animals. Cain, on the other hand, was the farmer, working the soil. But internally, Cain was brewing this incredibly unhealthy competition in his mind. He was growing more and more jealous of his brother, and that's a crucial detail because it sets up this toxic dynamic that's quietly taking root. Well, this simmering tension finally boils over when it's time for them to make an offering to God. Abel brings a fat, healthy goat, offering it up with profound gratitude, basically acknowledging that everything he has is a gift. Cain, though, he casually brings a basket of fruit and vegetables from his garden. But the source material notes a really revealing detail here. His produce didn't even seem fresh. Talk about doing the bare minimum, right? So, here's the turning point. God sees both offerings. He accepts Abel's heartfelt gift and is well pleased with it. But towards Cain's lackluster basket, he shows no pleasure at all. This rejection is the ultimate catalyst. It leaves Cain absolutely furious, just staring down at the ground in deep, bitter resentment. Which brings us to Section 3, the warning and the crime, the point of no return. Let's see how this goes from a feeling of rejection to a full-blown tragedy. God doesn't just let Cain sit there and seethe. He steps in with this incredibly powerful warning. He tells Cain that if he does well, he'll be accepted. But more importantly, he warns that sin is lurking at the door. God acknowledges Cain's dark desire, but makes it crystal clear that Cain has a choice and an obligation to master his own jealousy. But instead of taking a breath and mastering his emotions, Cain takes action. He coldly walks up to his trusting younger brother and says, "Hey, Abel, let's go out to the fields. I want to show you something." And he literally walks him out into a secluded no man's land. And this is where the ultimate betrayal happens. Despite Abel desperately crying out for mercy, pleading with his brother and begging for his life, Cain brutally attacks him. The source material shows us Cain's chilling mindset in that exact moment. As he's striking Abel down, he genuinely believes he's finally getting rid of his biggest enemy. He thinks this is what will bring him peace. With that tragic, violent act, his brother falls dead. The first crime on Earth is committed. And think about it. It wasn't over scarce resources or basic survival. It was born entirely from unchecked jealousy and a toxic sense of competition that had just festered in Cain's mind. But of course, it doesn't end out in that field. God confronts Cain with a very simple question. Where is your brother Abel? Now, instead of confessing, Cain callously evades the question. He lies right to God's face, firing back with one of the most famous defensive questions in human history. Am I my brother's keeper? But you can't hide the truth, right? God instantly shatters the lie. He reveals that he knows exactly what went down in that field, telling Cain, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me." The horrific reality of the crime is dragged entirely into the light. Now we hit Section 4, the curse of Cain, the price of jealousy. The fallout for this unprecedented betrayal is devastating. Remember, Cain was a farmer. Working the soil was his entire identity.
Yet God curses him from the very ground that soaked up his brother's blood. The punishment dictates that no matter how hard Cain works the earth, it will never yield its crops for him again. Stripped of his livelihood, he's condemned to wander the earth as a restless fugitive.
Hearing this, Cain is absolutely terrified. He suddenly realizes the sheer crushing weight of his punishment. He confesses that his crime was wrong, but begs for mercy out of pure fear for his own life. He knows that as a wandering outcast, anyone who runs into him might just kill him in retaliation.
But here's the twist. Surprisingly, God actually shows a measure of grace. He places a specific mark on Cain, a divine warning to anyone who might cross his path. The promise is clear. Whoever harms Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. This mark of Cain guarantees he'll live out his days carrying the heavy weight of what he did, rather than just being murdered himself.
So the narrative of this tragedy wraps up with a rapid downward spiral. From the confrontation and denial, to the curse, the mark of protection, and finally, exile. Cain heads east of Eden, settling in the land of Nod, permanently cut off from his family and the presence of the Lord.
And finally, Section 5, a lesson for today. The cycle continues. You know, it would be super easy to just write this off as some ancient myth that doesn't apply to us. But the source material makes a really pointed observation. That exact same toxic jealousy that poisoned Cain's mind, it's still causing strife in families today. The petty resentments, the fear of rejection, failing to control our dark desires, this unhealthy competition is happening every single minute all around us. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. If we're all connected, and the seeds of the very first crime were planted simply because one brother couldn't stand to see the others succeed, can we bother a bit about our siblings too? In our own lives, how can we do a better job of mastering our own jealousy and instead truly look out for one another? Think about that as you go through your week.